Morning. Woke up this morning and realized that my message to you that I had recorded yesterday didn't upload to the Canvas page. So, classic, right? But I'm here and ready to kind of introduce you guys to this next upcoming module and hopefully provide some clarifications that are useful for you. So you guys are right now in the middle of designing these quantitative tools. And one of the things about this process is that it takes a lot of revision. Sometimes I have students who sort of approach this, or in the past I've had students who approach this, especially teachers, with a sort of like, oh, I know how to write a survey, right? Because survey writing is something that sometimes comes along with being a teacher, right? You're surveying parents, you're surveying students, you're surveying your colleagues. But writing a survey for an academic research project is really a different task, right? And the stakes are a bit higher. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn things or use the things you've learned from making surveys in your work life to this process as well. And one of the things is the importance of revision, the importance of redesign, reconsideration, but also the importance of feedback. So this upcoming module is all about feedback. So you guys are in the middle of finalizing, I hope, these surveys or quantitative tools. Not everybody is going to make a survey, but most of you, that is what you have expressed to me. And frankly, that's what most educational researchers will be using if you're creating a quantitative tool. It's going to be a survey. So, the use of a survey is really important for people who want to do quantitative research, but understanding surveys and understanding how to read and interpret and also judge the quality of a survey is important for everybody. So even if you're not doing a strictly quantitative piece, or if you aren't focusing on quantitative data collection for your actual dissertation project, then you can still certainly use this. But making sure that every single time you are doing this, you are kind of getting feedback and thoughtful feedback from your peers is really important. But also this feedback process is an opportunity for you to spy on what other people are doing, get great ideas, right? One of the things that I wish that the academy, this sort of academic world that I live in now, did as well as teachers is share ideas. Teachers are really big sharers, right? We do it because that's part of our survival. And academics aren't as good at it. So I want you guys to tap into that part of teacher culture where we share, we give advice, we support each other in these non-judgmental ways. I want you to use that to develop, tweak, and hone these tools. So you are going to be sitting in both seats this week. You are both going to be someone who is presenting their work and trying to get good feedback to help you improve your work, but also you are going to be someone who is examining other people's work and giving them feedback and then using their work to reflect back on your own work. So there's a lot kind of operating here. The survey just needs to be done. This first draft of this piece just needs to be done by the time your group meets. So when you look at those small group feedback, that link on the module, what you'll see is that I've divided you guys into, I think, let me just double check here. Yeah, 3 distinct groups. After conversations with you guys about your work, I realized that we have a group of people who are going to really just strictly do qualitative work. So those are people who, despite the fact that they're doing qualitative work, they're still engaging with this quantitative study. And then we're going to have people who are doing full or heavy quantitative work. So people who, for example, in the case of Melissa, while she is considering doing a mixed methods project, her survey is really going to be a big, bulky part of that mixed methodology. And so she's going to land in that sort of more heavy quant category. And then the mixed methods people are people who want to use both, who are planning to use both a quantitative and qualitative portion to collect their data. So the qualitative group is Russ, Sean, and Wendy. The heavy quant group is Alan, Heather, and Melissa. And then the last group that we will have is Rebecca, Andy, Beth, and Catherine. So You guys are going to pick a time. You are going to let me know what that time is. Give me the Zoom link, and then we are all going to show up. I'm going to make every possible effort to be at every single one of these meetings, and we're going to give each other feedback. I'm also going to create for you guys, I haven't posted it yet because I'm not quite done with it, a rubric for feedback. And the goal isn't for you guys to do this for a grade or to perform for me, but rather to use that rubric to help you give feedback and to be thinking about all these categories. But the beauty of the rubric is that you should also be considering your own work and giving yourself a little bit of time to reflect on whether you're meeting all those pieces within that rubric. So it's really just an exploratory process, an opportunity for you guys to really practice, to talk through these things. So I hope that this week you really find useful. The entire time you're doing this, make sure that you are, working with that tool, updating that tool, and also keep in mind what I said in the last module. Quantitative work is a ton of upfront work. So a lot of this work of design and consideration and planning comes at this side for the quantitative piece. And for qualitative, it's going to be on the back end. It's a little bit more easy to design, but the process of doing that analysis can be more challenging. So we'll see that in our next module. Or we'll start to see it. So the other thing I would say to you is if you are looking at these groups and you are interested in like, well, I kind of want to see the mixed methods people, or I'm kind of interested in what Alan's doing, chime in with that group, see if they'll invite you to their feedback. I think it is always good to have more eyes on something. So, be aware that I think that is also something that would be potentially useful if you see other people in this list that you're interested in seeing their work. One of the last things I want to say to you guys is what you'll notice is that I have purposefully given you guys each roles in these groups. And I did that as a sort of pedagogical choice. I want to model for you guys an approach to doing group work or to sort of organizing group work that is really equity centered, and it's intended to actually promote better group work and better discussion. So think about these things maybe the next time you're putting groups together. What research tells us is that students who are put into groups who don't have jobs tend not to be as engaged, right? And kids who do have jobs in groups, who feel responsible to their group, feel that they have a role that they're playing that's active and important, actually do better. So there are times when giving kids freedom to sort of everybody just talk can be a really strong technique. But for the most part, when you're asking students to get into groups, you should be trying to assign them leadership within those groups, not just so that everybody, has a job to do and stays on task. That is a really important part, especially, from my perspective, when you're teaching 10th graders, giving them a job to do can be a really important thing. But I suspect it might be the same for 3rd graders. But the other thing that we don't often name in this process is the way that creating group structure aids equitable practices in your classroom. Who are the students who tend to naturally take the lead in groups? If you hand off to a group of 5 8th graders and say, hey guys, get together, work on this worksheet together, you're going to immediately see the group divide up the work, right? And typically the discussion is led by students who feel empowered, students who feel strong, students who feel they belong in that space. So the students who retreat in group projects are often students who feel the least confident, they feel the least invited to participate, and they are often students who are more commonly minoritized in society more broadly, and certainly in classrooms and schools. So by assigning a student who feels that they don't have a place in your classroom, assigning them the task of being the timekeeper or being the note taker immediately positions them to have a role that is named and that is sort of guided by the structure that you've given, and it invites them into leadership roles that they might not have naturally felt they had the right or place to take. So there's a couple of reasons that I wanted you guys to do this. I want to model good practice for you. I also want us to always be talking about equity and the way that our work can both support and can resist equitable experiences for students. So designing for that kind of stuff is part of what I want to do, and to model it for you guys as well. Okay, so the facilitators, the scheduling facilitators should be immediately reaching out to your group, trying to figure out what times will work. The Zoom or tech facilitator, you are in charge of getting the Zoom link, making sure everybody has the Zoom link, and then sort of facilitating the Zoom in all of its elements during the meeting, which includes, I would recommend recording, because it's a part of that process of revision that you want to go back and sort of listen again for what people pointed out to you, and it can be really helpful in that way. So consider Zoom facilitators doing that recording and then sending those recordings to your classmates. And then finally, feedback facilitators. These are people who are in charge of making sure that everyone is on task with that facilitation of feedback, making sure that, if there isn't feedback being given, if there's kind of a quietness in the group, those feedback facilitators are going to take the lead and maybe try to start the conversation. Another thing a feedback facilitator wants to do is make sure that there is a balance of feedback. You want to make sure there is both positive and critical feedback that can support the people in your group. Feedback facilitators can also take notes for people. That's sometimes things that feedback facilitators do. So think about what will work best for your group and consider asking them what kind of feedback they want, which is another really strong practice in terms of doing peer-to-peer feedback. Okay, so I'm just checking my notes to make sure I've gone over everything else. The last thing I want to say to you guys is, once you are done with these class sort of feedback groups, you are immediately going to redesign, change, tweak that tool, and then you are going to test it. So you're going to take it to people who will actually take the survey. I posted in an earlier module just a document that I happened to find of feedback that I got on an early stage of the survey that I created. And if you go back and compare the final survey and the survey that I got that feedback on, you'll see how much it changed, right? How much it improved. So you're going to take this feedback from your peers, you're going to redesign, then you're going to give this survey out to individuals based on your criteria, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then you're going to once again redesign. By the time you are done, you can do several iterations if you would like of this testing. The more testing in this stage, probably the better. So if you do, 2 rounds, that's great if you have time for that. The sooner you get this tool ready to be tested with your sort of testing subjects, the more feedback you can get. And also make sure you give those testers time. So if you're asking teachers to give you feedback, don't send it to them on a Friday afternoon and expect to have feedback by Saturday morning, right? Obviously, you want to make sure that you build in a couple of days for people to actually complete your survey because people are busy, and you want to make sure people are taking their time to give you good feedback. Okay, a feedback version, by the way, might include several questions at the end of your survey, which ask them to give you feedback. Those questions you would take out of the survey for the final piece, obviously. So don't be afraid to actually build into your survey some feedback options, right? Or do what I did, which is not use, maybe in your first round of feedback, you don't actually give it to them in Qualtrics. Maybe you give it to them in a table on a Word doc or something like that. Okay, the last thing I want to just say is that when you are choosing the people you're going to do your tests with, think thoughtfully about who is going to be best to give you feedback. Do not try to test with a huge, wide group of people. Pick a tight group of people who you trust, who you think are thoughtful and might know something. I wouldn't necessarily ask your mom to give you feedback on a survey intended for superintendents of school districts, right? Unless your mom happens to be a superintendent of a school district, then you are very lucky and she can probably give you lots of feedback. But pick people who are not going to be part of your sample. You do not want to compromise your survey or your sample by showing potential participants the questions and sort of prepping them for the work that you want to do with them in this testing phase. So you think about who you're ultimately going to use this with, and then, find a few people that you can use. You do not have to test on the exact population that you plan to survey. So if you want to survey principals, you could have teachers do your test. It's okay. Teachers know a lot about principals' jobs. They just might not be able to tell you everything. But in the end, their answers to those questions aren't as important as their feedback on whether they think those questions work, whether they think those questions make sense, whether they were confused about what you were asking, whether the links worked, whatever, right? The story I often tell people is that in one of my first rounds of my survey that I tested, I gave it to some teacher friends of mine in a different state because I knew that I was going to be using the state of Wisconsin and teachers in that state. So I sent it off to friends in Minnesota. And I got feedback from one of my friends who said, I can't believe that in the list of teaching jobs, you didn't include special education teachers. So this came from my friend Laura, who's a special education teacher in Minneapolis. And I looked back at my demographic data and what I was collecting for, and she was right. I had totally forgotten to include a huge portion of teachers in my demographic data. So thank goodness for Laura, right? Thank goodness I had other eyes on it, because otherwise I would have had a really messy job of unpacking that in the final stages when all of these teachers couldn't really identify themselves demographically in the field. Okay, so that's probably enough information. Deadline, somebody said a deadline changed overnight on Canvas. Apologize about that. I think February 4th was listed as the deadline or the due date for your first drafts. I'm not super worried about whether you have your first draft done by tomorrow. If it's done by tomorrow, that's great. You just have to have it done by the time your group agrees to meet. So if your group isn't meeting until Friday, then you have until Thursday night to get that first draft done. But if your group wants to meet a little earlier, that does give you more time to do testing. So as a group, consider all of the factors when you're setting your deadlines. Okay, so make sure, schedulers, that you get on email and you start talking to people. And once you have a date selected, please make sure you invite me so that I can show up. Zoom facilitators, I will need the link, just like everybody else, so don't forget about me. All right, thanks guys, and have a great weekend. I hope you don't work too hard and you have some time to rest and enjoy the people you love. Okay, bye guys.